Hello, please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on Thursday, 27th of November from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Johnny Morris, Chairperson of the committee. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on the website. Can I remind members to use their microphones, and can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Turning to the agenda, we have no apologies received by Dermot, and I think we're all in attendance. That's great. And any item 2, disclosures of interest. 3, 2, 1. Gone. Okay, number 3, chair's announcements. Just to make you all aware, I'm sure you already are aware, there's going to be an additional meeting on the 29th of January next year. So I have something to announce. Very exciting. Number 4 is to note the Audit and Governance Work Programme 25-26. Is that noted? Agreed. Yep. Thank you. Fantastic. Item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. First of all, I'll ask if these are a correct record, and then I'll come to matters arising from the minutes. So, are these minutes agreed as a correct record first? Great. Thank you. Items arising from the minutes. First one is item 5, which is the external audits annual report, which was in the minutes was given as being available in time for this meeting, and you'll notice from your agenda we don't have that. So I'm inviting Simon Mathers to update us on the situation with that as part of his verbal update as item 9 on the agenda. And item 8 was where we invited a representative of the Public Sector Audit Appointments Committee to come and visit us and speak to us. They declined our generous offer. So myself and Section 151 Officer Liz Keys made a representation to them with our concerns over the increases to scale fees, essentially. And I have the PSA response here. I'll read out a few edited highlights at the moment, but you'll all have a copy of the response in full after this meeting. The reason why it's not on the agenda is because there's no one to answer questions on this because there's no PSAA representative to answer on it. The summary. PSAA is responsible for providing an auditor appointment scheme for eligible bodies which choose to opt in and out, and is required to monitor contract compliance in a statutory role as appointing person and to set fees. So that's the crucial part of that. The main contractual power given to PSA is to replace an auditor that is not performing. However, that relies on there being alternative supply. As illustrated by our 2022 procurement, that is not the reality. Rather than having a choice of suppliers, the total capacity offered from the bidders on the first round was 90% of what we needed to make the appointments. We got there in the end, but after 4 rounds of procurement with the same suppliers. There remains no spare capacity and no queue of audit firms wanting to join the supplier list. As far back as 2019, we were raising concerns about the market, and we commissioned and published independent research on the issues. Our response to the review of 2020 on local audit issue said, local audit needs a regulatory framework which is able to be responsive to the needs and unique challenges affecting local bodies. We hope that the local audit office will deliver that vision. Moving on, they say that audit firms are independent once appointed, and so it's a matter for their professional judgment and is what is needed to deliver a code of audit practice compliant audit. PSA is required to set the scale fees and determine any proposed variations to it. And while they examine every proposal and amend them where appropriate to arrive at the fee determination, they cannot challenge auditor judgments on the fees. Regarding on the scale fee expectations, the response, which is from Tony Crawley at PSA, I should have said that. The headline is this: another illustration that the current framework is not fit for purpose is that legislation requires us to publish the 25-26 scale fees by the 30th of November 25, but the 24-25 audits were not due to be completed until 27th of February 2026, and so they have significantly incomplete data to work with. The legislation also states that the scale fees cannot be amended after 30th of November 2025, which means that fee variations are all but inevitable as the scale fees have to be set so early. We have flagged that the changes in audit mean that this means we have incomplete data since the 2020-2021 fees consultation. It has long been the case that the scale fee is unlikely to represent the full cost of a code audit. And regarding how PSA determines the fee variations, if there's a disagreement between the authority and the external auditors, we expect auditors to discuss proposed fee variations with bodies at the earliest opportunity. Wherever possible, the auditor should highlight at the planning stage any additional work that is likely to be needed during the audit, including potential fee implications, although it may not be possible to quantify this until the work is done. In cases of disagreement, we ask the body to provide a summary of the issues, but ultimately, though, we are required to come to determination, taking into account all of the information available to us. I'm sure that was that might not have answered your question to your satisfaction, but I hope it has given their position on the question of Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. I'm quite certain that that summary did not answer the question that you asked. What is our contractual arrangement with PSAA, and what consideration is being given to ending that arrangement, given that they are clearly not meeting what I was expecting to be delivered by PSAA in the second round?
In response to that, I could give you my understanding of the situation, but I think, Neil, can you answer that? Or Gareth, who is most equipped to answer that?
Well, in terms of an alternative to PSAA, there really isn't one, and that's the issue. I think East Hampshire may have tried to do it themselves unsuccessfully, and they've now come into PSAA.
But regarding your point about whether they answer our questions fully, that is certainly the question I received as well, from your response as well. But I think they've answered them as fully as they are going to, shall we say. We've also on Wednesday, yesterday, the PSA published their scale fees for the 25-26 audit on their website. This will, I think, come to a future meeting, but the initial proposal was an average increase of about 4%, of which 2.8% is inflationary increase and a provisional 1.2% for additional audit work. Considering consultation, the final uplift for additional audit work has been reduced, is less than that, it's 0.28%, but that's in addition to 2.8% inflation, giving an overall average fee increase of 3.08%. If they say, as a proviso, if any additional audit work is required beyond what is covered by the scale fee, we'll review the associated costs in line with our established fee variation process. So that's the latest news on scale fees. The final item arising from the minutes is item 12, which is where we asked at a future meeting an update on the management action plan in relation to the community infrastructure levy at a future committee. And I think if Neil can answer that, it'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have a statement from Liz Keys, the Director of Finance, which I'll read to you if you don't mind. In the Internal Auditor's conclusion report for 2024-25, AG 164, set out a summary of findings in the recent audit on developer contributions, for which the auditor was only able to give limited assurance to members. The audit identified issues around the calculation of community infrastructure levy payments, recovery action for outstanding civil debts, and the recording of some data in the system to ensure it is a single source of information on the collection and spending of contributions. Following the audit findings, officers have progressed the management actions to remedy the weaknesses identified. Work is underway to review all SIL payments since 2014, which made up of 500 payments across 300 applications, and is focused initially on high priority actions. Liz Keys committed to bringing an update to a future meeting. It's anticipated that by the committee meeting in January, the calculations and corrective actions will be finalised to make that update possible.
Thank you. Any questions on this? I have the opportunity. Okay. Then we're moving on from the minutes to item 6, public participation. Mr. Tate, would you like to speak now, or as part of item 10 on the housing strategy? Item 10. Okay. If I forget you, please wave your arms and make sure I don't forget you. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, the final report on pay policy statement 26-27, pages 15 to 40 of your agenda. Manjit Sidhu to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Under the Localism Act 2011, it is a statutory requirement that every council prepare and adopt a pay policy statement and have that statement approved by council each year. As you will see in the statement, it includes our policies relating to remuneration of the council's employees on appointment, subsequent progression and any use of performance pay. The Act also requires councils to define lowest paid employees to consider the relationship between the remuneration of the highest and lowest paid. The council is a living wage foundation employer, which means that a nationally agreed minimum hourly rate of pay is applied to directly employed employees. At Annex A, you'll see the pensions discretion policy. This details whether council will or will not exercise its discretion. As you will understand, it is important our pay policy needs to be at the appropriate level to secure and retain high quality employees to deliver services to the public. And just a point to say, the pay policy statement does not contain any substantial changes to those considered previously. I think the two main changes are that we've added in a bit of text in relating to pensions, as the age that you can access pensions is currently 55, and that is changing to 57 from April 2028. And you'll also see we have a policy in there about acting up pay, and again we've just amended that slightly as we are thinking that we may need the acting up for longer than 12-month period, which is what was detailed in the policy statement last year. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Questions from members? Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 questions. One, the point raised there, why would we be considering temporary acting up paying for more than 12 months? Secondly, what is the current living wage that we are paying? And how many apprentices do we have today in employment?
Yeah, okay. So first, in relation to acting up pay, the reason we've updated that is that as we approach LGR and as we approach that journey, it may be appropriate for us to pay that for a longer period of time. So that's really why that discretion is in there. As far as apprenticeships, we have probably around 4 or 5 at the moment, and again that can change over a period of time. And I must apologise, I missed out the middle question.
Living wage,
living wage, which is the lowest pay on our in the policy. So I think it's 28. Bear with me. Did you get that? So no, sorry, it's 26,824. So it's the bottom of our pay scale.
Thank you, Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. We only look at this once a year. I think it would be useful if we were sent a copy of the changes shown by email, so that we don't have to so we don't have to see what has changed. I think that would be very useful in future, Chairman. Thank you.
So I don't know that.
I recall being someone with the track changes in red.
Yes, track changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We usually get that, I think, each year, but
I received one as well, so if
I'm
you
afraid
didn't-
I didn't.
Okay. I shouldn't.
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Bailey Morgan, please.
Just to follow up to one of Councillor Godfrey's questions on the apprentices, are they being paid a living wage? And if not, why not?
There is a separate pay scale for apprenticeships. So we have a set one, it's a national pay scale. Again, I don't have that to hand, but again, happy for members to circulate that afterwards, if that's helpful.
Okay. The extra information is always appreciated.
I've got a separate question. In the update, obviously it refers to the Hutton review and the pay ratio of what ideally 20:1 or less. And I see that obviously Winchester it's around 5.6:1. I think the 20:1 is seen normally as quite high within local government. Is there the possibility of updating the pay statement to aim for something a little lower than 20:1? I mean, I'm not trying to restrict the chief executive's potential pay rises, but 20:1 seems quite a big difference between that and the 5.6:1 that we currently have. Thanks.
I think what I would say is looking at where we're going with LGR, we probably are not looking to make any changes to the pay structure over the next 2 years. But I think what I can take is that as we are looking at the new unitary authority, I can take that comment away with me, and as we start to have those discussions, bear that in mind.
Thank you, Councillor Brophy.
Just regarding the ratios, and I've got this horrible, I have a deja vu feeling. I may have asked this before, and apologies if I have, but obviously we have a ratio between our highest and lowest paid employees, but how do we relate that to the sort of the wider impacts in terms of our contractors as well and service providers? So is there a danger, and are we mitigating the danger of outsourcing some of the inequalities to, say, contractors? Do we monitor that in any way? So are we aware that, say, for example, Idverdi, that they're actually, if you take into account their lowest pay, is that on our radar at all, or has that ever been looked at?
I'm afraid I need to take that away with me. I just need to have a look at what we do with contractors. Again, we do generally have some of those policies that run through, and when we are contracting, we do that. Oh, Gareth may be able to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a matter for each individual contract, and I couldn't comment on the situation here because I don't have that information to my fingertips. Where I've worked previously, there have been provisions on pay for contractors in contracts, but as I said, it would be a matter for each individual one, and we'll take that away.
I guess the observation is that it's a fairly meaningless to have sort of a living wage policy if the lowest people that we really kind of, fund are contractors, and if they're not also inspired or incentivized by contracts to do that. So that would be quite useful to know.
So as a follow-up to that, we have an actual policy in place regarding living wages for outside bodies that are contracted. Can somebody answer that? Okay, Councillor Godfrey, okay.
Thank you. Having introduced the policy in 2013, our accreditation again with the Living Wage Foundation is dependent on us having our contracts include a requirement for contractors to provide a living wage payment for their staff who are working on our contracts. It is not an absolute requirement, But I believe it is, we are given assurance to a Living Wage Foundation that it is in our contract. I would welcome confirmation of that when it is available. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll take that away and report back on it.
Thanks. We have that noted as in the minutes that it as something to report back for a future meeting. Thank you. Any further questions? Bailey Morgan.
Yeah, thank you. One more from me. Do we have an idea of the number of agency staff at the moment and what the impacts that is on the sort of pay structure? And I guess a quick follow-up would be, obviously with LGR coming up, are we concerned with staff retention and a greater increase in sorry, I've lost my train, but I think you got the gist.
As far as agency staff, we are logging those and monitoring them with our corporate heads of service. So again, we do have that, and we're providing that data very regularly to our corporate heads at the moment. They tend to be in particular areas, so property related particularly, or short-term contracts. So we are providing more and more regular reports on agency. We are keeping a really good eye on that. And as far as going forward, recruitment, retention, I think it's fair to say the market has been difficult even throughout the last couple of years, and we are keeping a good eye on as we move forward. We understand that LGR will be an added uncertainty for the market, so we are sort of keeping an ongoing look at that. We're also looking at strategic workforce planning, so working with services at the moment to look at what that looks like over the next 2 years.
Thank you. Any further questions? Then I move to debate. And apart from thanking Councillor Godfrey for his information on the policy introduced in 2013, which is very helpful, we move to the recommendation that this pay policy statement for the financial year 26-27 is recommended to the Council for adoption. Is that noted? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on then to item 8, the Treasury Management Mid-Year Reports 25-26, AG 179. Gemma and/or Daniel to introduce from Hampshire County Council. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening, members. This report covers the Treasury Management performance for the Council during the first half of 25-26. One of the key reasons that we present this report is to demonstrate that we're operating within both the boundaries of the Treasury Management strategy and the relevant legislation, excuse me, and accounting standards. And I'm pleased to say that all Treasury activity in the year to date continues to demonstrate full compliance. Just a brief few words on the external context section in the report, just to say that things have obviously moved on slightly from when this was written, as we've had a further MPC meeting in that time where the bank rate was held at 4%, and obviously even more recently yesterday we had the Chancellor's budget. We've not really seen markets move drastically to either of those events, and given that a lot of the expectations had already been priced in recent weeks, but I just wanted to highlight that regardless, as obviously two quite key events in our Treasury world. I'll move on now to table 1 in the report, which is on page 46 of the report pack, and you'll no doubt all be familiar with this by now, but just to recap very briefly, this gives a balance sheet summary at the end of the previous financial year and then the forecast for the position as at the end of the current year. And you'll see that the Council is forecast to move to a net borrowing position owing to an increase in the CFR, as well as reductions in existing borrowing and balance sheet resources, which means that additional borrowing will be required. And that's something that I'll touch on more in just a second. Looking at the Treasury Management position in table 2, you can see that net borrowing reduced by 3.8 million, as 0.2 million of borrowing was repaid, along with investments increasing by 3.6 million. And this is entirely in line with the normal pattern we would see over the course of the financial year, where balances tend to increase in the first half before reducing again towards year end. 0.2 million of EIP borrowing with the PWLB was repaid in the period. And again, just to recap, EIP stands for equal instalments of principal. So it means that part of the principal value of the loan is repaid with interest every 6 months rather than at its entirety at maturity. So following on from what I said when talking on table 1, whilst it's not taken place in the period in question, it is worth mentioning that the council has arranged this week for £5 million of borrowing from the PWLB. And again, this is as an EIP loan, and that's to refinance some of the existing borrowing that's due to mature before the end of the financial year. This has the effect of reducing the amount required to get through that year-end period, but more will be needed, and our team at Hampshire County Council will work with Neil and with Liz and colleagues to establish that appropriate time to take that additional requirement. And all of this, of course, will be done in consultation with Arlene Close, our Treasury advisors. The investments picture hasn't really changed dramatically, and given that cash balances are at a relative high point in the year, you can see that we've moved into slightly longer dated assets such as Treasury bills, which typically have a maturity up to about 3 months, rather than being solely invested in things like money market funds and other cash assets. And you'll see that this is actually reflected in the benchmarking exercise in table 5, where you can see that maturity is lengthened slightly, but it's still very short overall. The rest of the metrics in that benchmarking exercise remain very similar to where they were 3 months ago. Whilst the returns seen on the portfolio have decreased over the course of the year so far, again, this should be seen in the wider context of those cuts to interest rates that I've talked about. And actually, they are comparable to the other authorities included in the exercise. Finally, and I suppose most importantly, looking at the indicators in the report, and you'll see that the council was compliant across the board in Q2, as well as in Q1, the indicators for which can be found in the appendix to the report. So I wasn't intending to say any more, Chairman, but happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Questions from members of the committee? Any questions? I think your report answered every possible question. We'll move to debate. Any debate on the issue? Then, if we it was quicker than I expected, which is always nice. So recommendations. Note to the mid-year Treasury Management Report for 24-25, including the Q2 indicators and the Q1 indicators at Appendix B. And note all Treasury Management activity in the period was compliant with the Council's Treasury Management strategy. Is that noted and agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. And thank you, Gemma and Daniel. That was painless. Okay, moving to item number 9. It's the external auditor's verbal update. Simon Mathers to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So I will start with the point that was raised in matters from the last meeting and the report or not at this meeting. So we have drafted an auditor's annual report that has been carefully drafted with officers over a period of time and was shared as a draft with management for comment 2 weeks ago. So the report is done and drafted. It will be issued to the chair of the committee as the body charged with governance of council and the section 151 electronically tomorrow to meet the deadline in the NAO's Code of Audit Practice of issuing a draft by the 30th of November. So the report is done and has been done for a little while. In terms of verbal progress on the audit more broadly, so we have been doing the accounts audit now for just over a month. It's going really well. Thanks go to Mr. Aitken and his team. They have serviced the audit really well. Good responses to queries, quick, worked with us what we need to deliver an efficient accounts audit. There are no particular issues I would draw to your attention apart from the valuation of property, plant and equipment and investment property. So there will be, again, a lack of agreement between valuers. Our valuers don't consider the methodology adopted to be appropriate and supportable. What we have sought to do this time is to expedite matters. So rather than going round and round on that point and accruing time and indeed fee, we have stopped earlier and we'll just report that as a conclusion. So you will see that when we issue our reports. I would say, all right, that expedites the matter. It doesn't resolve the matter. So we do need to get to a point going forward where those issues with property, plant and equipment valuation and investment property valuation are addressed if we are to give assurance in that area. We now have a January meeting. We will bring the final auditor's annual report and the final audit results report to that January meeting of the committee. We will be discharging our responsibilities well ahead of the 27th of February statutory backstop deadline. I will stop there, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the verbal update. Members' questions. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. We come back again to property and assets valuation. I think last time it cost us about £56,000 to agree to disagree. You must have met this circumstance elsewhere. How has it been resolved in those cases? Thank you.
So we do have issues with property, plant and equipment and investment property valuation are more pervasive. However, I would say this is not the norm. This is more unusual. How has it been resolved elsewhere? Well, councils have looked at obtaining different valuations from different professionals. That's an issue. In terms of the cost, we're doing everything we've heard that we can to mitigate the cost. The issue that we do have is there are historic problems. So when we do our risk assessment each year, it's going to be an area of significant risk because we know that we've had issues with it previously. That being the case, we need to engage our valuers to look at the valuations. What we've done this time is to sort of draw a line under that work much more quickly than we had done previously. We can give quite granular feedback and have given on what we think is wrong with the valuations. You know, in order to address it, look at that granular feedback and come with evidence to support it in the following period.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. I guess to follow on for Councillor Parry, if I recall correctly, the work undertaken on the property, plant and equipment review previously attracted additional fees. So if I heard you correctly, you've stopped work on the current audit or agreed to stop work because it's positioned to effectively agree to disagree. Does that mean there's no additional fees that will be incurred as a result?
No, I'm not going to say that and can't say that because we've needed to engage our valuers to look at it because it's an area of risk because we've not got to a point of resolution previously. Within that context, we've done all that we can to reduce the amount of time spent on it and mitigate any fee impact.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder what officers could advise us has been done to synchronise the methods of valuation so that the auditors stop wasting our money on the differences in methods.
If any officers would like to answer that, this is an opportunity.
I mean, it's a difficult area. We've employed professional valuers to provide valuations. As Mr. Mathers has said, Audit has ceased the work to date on valuations, but having had conversations with our external valuers myself, I do know that they have considered the comments Ernst & Young made in the previous year. I'm not sure. I mean, one thing I would say to Mr. Mathers, when we did ask the previous year for some evidence to support EY Real Estate's valuations, they declined to provide it. So it's quite difficult for our valuers to compare their evidence to the EY Real Estate evidence to agree the valuation. That's good.
We'd be very happy to give granular feedback. I have to be clear that these issues are not generally pervasive. So it is not everywhere that we have these issues.
Thank you, Councillor Pinniger.
Could you summarise the areas of difference, you know, the fundamental points on which we can't agree?
So it would depend on the valuation bases. So one of the bigger issues is around purchasers' costs and what allowances are made for those. Some of the issues are around lack of comparables. So for things that are carried at fair value or existing use value, often we look for market comparables and evidence to support the valuation. We feel that market comparables have not been looked for or are not sufficient. We feel that in general that there is insufficient evidence and documentation of assumptions and insufficient support for the assumptions. So it depends on the valuation basis, but there are a number of areas, and we can give that and will give that if it's helpful granular feedback.
Okay, thank you. And how has this been resolved when it's come up in other councils? I mean, or is it just rumbling on?
So I would say it's unresolved at some councils. So there are a small number of other councils in a similar situation. Generally, where we've fed back at a granular level, and we've highlighted this as an issue, councils have done something. So changed the internal review of the valuations, changed the actual valuer that does the valuation to address the points that we've raised.
Thank you. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. I'm no less confused than I was at the beginning of this section. I'm grateful for Councillor Power for raising this particular matter. But we have heard Mr. Mowers give an explanation of the types of reason why there have been variations in the or concerns about the difference in variation between council's valuation and the auditor's valuation. We've heard Mr. Aitken explain why they have not been able to change the way they've done their valuations. I have not heard anything to explain how the two parties are going to bring these two figures together. And I believe that that's really what we should be hearing. Why are we not bringing the valuations to a common understanding, as we would do in any other circumstance?
Thank you. Would either of the parties like to respond? Simon?
So we will give granular feedback as to what we believe is wrong in the valuations. It is for the council to then address that.
Even though Mr. Aitken has already said that you were not willing to do so last year.
And Neil, would you like to take the opportunity to respond to this?
On that last point, Councillor Godfrey, there was I don't recall exactly the information that we requested. It was with a particular valuation that we didn't receive, where our external valuers asked whether they could see the comparables so they could look at them and consider them. Having been involved in the review of the valuations this year, I do know some of the points raised in the previous audit to do with the yield on Brook Shopping Centre, one of our investment properties, for example. And I believe the valuation of the leisure centre, that I believe was addressed in the current year valuations, but I'm not sure whether EYRE looked at those this year.
We'll clearly take an approach where we sample valuations each year and wouldn't necessarily look at the same valuation every year. I suppose the broader point I would make, though, our EYRE professionals look at a whole host of valuers, and internal and external, doing the work across, an awful lot of councils nationally. They do not flag these issues consistently. It's not something that is pervasive. So if they are finding this, I think it's a reliable conclusion because they look across valuers. So it's something that still does need to be worked on and addressed going forward if we're going to get to a position where we can give you assurance on it.
Thank you. Can I ask, your concerns are going to be in the internal audit report, which you're about to deliver and which we'll be discussing in January, is that correct?
Yes, so we will report on it in the auditors and the audit results report that we'll bring to the January meeting of the committee. Yeah.
Councillor Power.
Chairman, thank you. I think we should express our concern that this comes back every single year and costs us money, costs the taxpayers money. And I would like officers and Mr. Mather to advise how we can prevent this happening in future every year, because it's just unseemly. Is that a fair expression?
Can I ask you to clarify what you're referring to? You're referring to the issue of
The valuation of property, the investment and assets. It does cost us. I think it's 3 years now that we've had this little difference of opinion, but they're not minor differences of opinion. We do need to find a way forward so it doesn't happen every year.
Okay, I take that more as a point of debate rather than a question. But if something matters.
So I would say this, so, as I've just said, it's the one point within the council's accounts and arrangements for producing the financial statements and the support we get during the audit that causes us a significant problem. The remainder of the accounts, we do not have an issue with. We get very good quality support in the audit. The accounts are well supported. So it is a discrete area. I absolutely agree with that point and suggesting it needs to be resolved going forward.
As councillors have expressed concern of this issue, it should be noted in the minutes so that it doesn't fall by the wayside again, so that it remains constantly in the mind of our Section 151 officers. Thank you. Any further questions? Then should we any debate on the update? Okay, then I move that we note Simon's update. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you for your update. Cheers. Moving on to item 10, the internal audit progress report 25-26. Before Anthony steps up, it's the opportunity for public speaking. If Mr. Ian Tate would take the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee. On page 11 of Annex 1 of AG 172, it covers the New Homes Programme substantial. The management action makes reference to a re-tender of the Woodman Close project. Just to remind members, this is a scheme for two-bed bungalows and 3 one-bed terraced homes. On the 14th of October, Cabinet approved the final business case with a total scheme cost of £2,057,000. That was a 5% increase on an earlier figure. In simple terms, that's £400,000 for a one-bed property and £450,000 for a two-bed bungalow, no land costs. On the 19th of November, Cabinet considered a paper regarding Hobbs View Southbrook Cottages entitled Lessons Learned. That scheme was 27% over budget and the final bill was just over £2.5 million. From an internal audit perspective, what view have they expressed about this and what lessons can be learnt to ensure that Woodman Close scheme is delivered on budget? I would mention that with a build cost of £6,667 per square metre, no commercial developer could build at these high figures. Why are the internal auditors not challenging the council over its build costs? Even though Woodman Close development is clearly meeting a local housing need, I cannot understand how these figures have not been challenged. I work within the development industry and none of my contacts can understand how these figures make sense. The figures are not insubstantial. We're talking of millions of pounds. they're reliant on Section 106 monies. £337,500 per dwelling is coming out of a ring-fenced budget. And if you read the Section 106 requirements, those funds should be used in the area where the 106 monies was derived. Now, that's difficult for me to find, but I think a lot of that money is coming from the North Whiteley Urban Extension. So when I go back to the council plan outcome, internal audit plays a vital role in supporting the council accomplish planned outcomes, bringing systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control and governance process. The council is responsible for establishing and maintaining appropriate risk management processes. It goes, I cannot see that that is working. These are incredibly large sums of money. I've raised it at Cabinet, I've raised it at Cabinet Housing, and it gets lost. I raise it at internal audit because somehow there should be an audit function to challenge those figures. Those figures are utterly unsustainable. And yes, it's meeting a local need, as it did in Mitchell Dever, where the costs were 27% over budget at £7,200 a square metre. These are absolutely extraordinary and unsupportable figures. And I would hope that audit can
Thank you for your
invest.
Thank you for your information. I shall give if Anthony Harvey or Neil or anyone else, any other officers would like to speak in response to this, you have an opportunity to do so. Or if Anthony wants to, you can come to it later on if you want, or as part of your report. Thank you. Anthony Harvey to introduce the audit, internal audit progress report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Apologies for the technical glitch. I don't quite know what's happened there. So the first of the papers I'm bringing to your attention tonight is the internal audit progress report in relation to the 25-26 agreed internal audit plan. And this reflects our position up to the end of October. If I refer to page 64 of the agenda pack, paragraph 5.11, this outlines a few areas to note. So firstly, that there's new performance measures that have been aligned to the internal audit strategy for the next 3 years, which is covered in a couple of papers' time. At the time of reporting, 32% of the reports had reached at least draft report stage. Things have moved on a little bit now, and now almost at 50% of reports are now at least draft report stage, with obviously a corresponding reduction of the reviews that are work in progress. The detail behind those figures is outlined in the roll and work programme, which is on pages 69 to 71 of your agenda pack. The report also provides an update on some resourcing issues on page 68 of the agenda pack under the appropriate section. And it also confirms the Council's progress with implementing actions that have arisen out of previous audit reviews, with additional information provided on pages 74 through to 76. I'm pleased to report that the Council have confirmed that there are 5 previous audit review areas where all actions have been completed, and at the time of reporting, there are just 2 reported actions that have passed their agreed implementation date. There are no proposed plan adjustments currently, as noted on page 71 of the agenda pack. There has been one review that has been finalised that concluded with a limited assurance opinion in and around fly tipping enforcement, and a summary is provided on pages 72 to 73 of the agenda pack. So I think that highlights the main issues arising out of the report at this stage. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is more of a question for officers rather than for Mr. Harvey. Fly tipping and other reports on my council services. I'm sure it won't be any news to councillors that the man that's found a fly tip does not care which council is responsible. They do not care who is responsible for that pothole. They just want it fixed. As a consequence, I do not persuade residents to use my council services or the Hampshire service, because anything that requires me to remember a password is not going to get used. Why are we not using Fix My Street, which takes all sorts of problems, and given a bit of support, we'll send them to the appropriate authority without me or my resident having to think about who's responsible. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Cutler, you've stepped up.
I sympathise with Councillor Power's concerns about using my council services. I found another incident not connected with fly tipping, but reporting a waste bin. We are constantly looking at improving that approach. It does not need a password if you use it on a smartphone, but it is the process that we have been currently using, but I will look at it further. I think there are a number of things that come up in the internal audit of the fly tipping process that are technical process issues that we do need to deal with, particularly about prosecutions. But the reality is, of course, we know that fly tipping incidents have now reached a very low level compared with what they've been over the years. I'm not complacent about that, and we can obviously improve our systems, but I don't think the two things are slightly separate about the processes that we have around prosecutions, which was one element of it, and cover is something that I do think we do need to look at in terms of, as I say, my council services. I've been working with the digital team to try and improve that as much as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question that actually builds on Mr. Tate's input at the start of this agenda item. And forgive me if I just preface a little bit. The reason I mentioned this, you mentioned, I think, Woodman in your question, and actually at the time I asked a question about that as it was, well, from my ward perspective, I should say, not necessarily as an audit and governance member, it was quite full, not dissimilar to a similar building, my ward, Winecross Cottages in Borrant. And when I asked a question at the time about Woodman Close, there are a few factors, I understand it, that went into the costs that were proposed. Obviously, the fees, the build costs, as you alluded to, and contingencies that are associated with that. You mentioned local need, which is obviously a very important aspect. The net increase in dwellings provided is also an important factor in, and itself comes with a cost. My question, which I'm guessing to, I promise, is my recollection, although I can't quite get to my notes in time, is from a build cost perspective, that is not necessarily a city council derived number. We engage with external consultants who provide an input on the build costs. There's obviously been a significant increase, as we all know, in build costs of housing over recent years. So can I just ask officers whether that assumption is correct? That is a number that we engage with external consultants to provide an input on. It's not necessarily a number that we generate ourselves.
If officers can answer that, or do you take it away?
So yeah, I think we need to take officers to answer that.
I think it's to take it away, unless Neil's looking like he wants to speak, but I can't tell. He's too far away.
I mean, I think it is a question of the difference between a policy decision, which Mr. Tate spoke at both the meetings where the
the decisions were taken over Woodden and Coast, and whether the process, which is what internal audit's more about. I don't know if Mr. Harper's got a view on that, but the substantial opinion was around the processes that we use, which means that we did have accurate figures. We just chose to make a decision based on those figures. So I wonder if we're lapsing into, in answering Mr. Tate's questions, we're lapsing into discussion of policy rather than the audit role of process. It's just a point.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. I mean, hideously familiar with both the examples quoted by Mr. Tate, and both being in my ward. The Hobbs View project started off as being a very exciting extension of policy, but the process failed because the costs ran away. And the interesting thing about Woodden and Close is the costs have run away before we even started the project. And whether or not that's an extension of policy or a loss of control. And I'm interested in the internal audit perspective is how do we prevent or identify that level of risk where projects are going to lose more money than we should be allowing for, and where decisions are based on much higher risk factors that would need a different approach. If we're getting close to being exceeding the contingency amount, and we exceed the contingency amount by a significant amount in Hobbs View, shouldn't the process have stopped that happening? Why hasn't it? I'd be interested to know what the audit view on that is.
Anthony, do you have a view on that? Thank you.
Sadly, so as Councillor Cutler said, we would look at the frameworks and the processes that were followed without looking at specific individual projects or programs, or whichever one you want to look at it, without knowing the exact detail behind that. I wouldn't be able to comment, but you would expect that if you've taken a project management approach, that you've identified your risks, that those risks are being managed, that they are being actively reported on, and all of our work from previous audits have confirmed those things have happened. So whether or not your internal controls were in place and operating, obviously without knowing the individual specific case, it's very difficult for me to comment on. But yes, your internal processes should have identified those, and at some point, either it was an identified risk that you were willing to accept, or it was a risk that was outside of your risk appetite, and the brakes should have been put on any project, irrespective of what it may be. So obviously we look to seek assurances that those controls are in place and get reasonable assurance. Can never be absolute. We can't look at absolutely every single last thing that the council does. The audit fee would be more than the council budget in order to do that. So we can only ever give reasonable assurance that the frameworks are in place and they are operating as intended. Obviously, after the event, we can look back at individual things and then look to see, have controls broken down, where opportunities missed, where flags identified and ignored. But again, I can't comment on specific cases that may or may not have come up within the audit work that was undertaken. Again, with the scope of any individual audit review, they're always discussed, agreed with the management team based upon those risks. Sometimes we look at the wider framework. Sometimes those frameworks are new, so the application of the framework may be a bit too early to assess. At other times, we can obviously do sort of substantive testing and around compliance with your frameworks and identify issues or confirm based upon the work undertaken, that there were no issues from our perspective. With regards to some of the sort of very detailed questions that were mentioned, why didn't the auditors sort of question the valuation of certain things, or the cost of the project? That's just not our role. So probably not more to add on that.
And I'd just like to add that, the lessons learned paper on Hobbs who went to scrutiny and it went to council. So the process in that respect worked. If there hadn't been a lessons learned, then there would be a complaint through the audit process. But, it was clear that there were quite a few lessons to learn from that. And one of those was around the risk, and I have requested that there was one of the recommendations was that we should look at the design and build approach rather than the contract approach with a contingency. What I have requested that we know that we find out is the comparison between those two things, because no use just going out for a tender on one type or the other, because you don't know what you're paying for the risk. If you hand the risk to the developer, you pay a premium. What we need to understand is what that insurance premium is, rather than a contract-based approach that has a contingency built into for increased cost. So, there is work going on in terms of those lessons learned. But again, I think that's around the decisions that were taken rather than whether the process was wrong.
Thank you. It's useful to identify that the process is not to blame for any sort of shortcomings in the decision. Would that be fair to say?
If the committee wanted to request, when you get to the audit plan, that the internal auditors took a closer look at that, I'm sure that might be considered, but I'm not sure it's necessary.
Councillor Godfrey.
If we're looking to a future, then perhaps we could look at the post-project review process as well, because quite clearly, having been through the review into Hobbs' view, it is inadequate, as it did not include most of the stakeholders involved.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Brophy. The microphone on, please.
Apologies. With regards to fly tipping points, the clean street enforcement, are there IT or data challenges as well as process challenges getting in the way of effective monitoring? And are those the sorts of challenges that we could invest in technology to do better, but would struggle to do due to something like LGR? So is this a risk that's likely to be a perpetual one? And I don't know if that's a question for Mr. Harvey or for Councillor Cutler.
I think the report identifies that there are some problems with that reporting process and some of the information recording. It may be that we can address some of those issues through our digital team. Under the, as I think I've explained at other meetings, that under the TC25 process, the digitisation of services as major projects will have to take a back seat because of LGR. But there is still, we now have the in-house expertise that should be able to work on introducing some of those tweaks to the system that we have that may improve them. The problem comes if we get to the point of saying, actually, we can only improve it so far, and under the original plans for TC25, we've probably said, so it's time to move to another platform. We can't do that at this stage until we're absolutely sure who we're going to be integrating with.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey Morgan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a question about internal audit performance. Actually, I thought your verbal update sounded more, I guess, optimistic than my reading of the report. Looking at the achievements for last year, I understand that 81% of the audit plan was delivered to a target of 95%. And then I was just looking at the numbers this year compared to last year. It looks like in terms of the number of audits that haven't actually started, they've actually increased this year. So I guess based on that, my thinking was that you might struggle to achieve 81% of audits, internal audits being complete on time. The numbers you gave in your verbal update sounded a bit more promising, but I guess the question is, how confident are you of most or more than 81% of the audits being achieved?
Okay. If you refer back to my annual conclusion report, which I think I brought to the July meeting, the reasons why the majority of those audits hadn't reached reporting stages were outside of our control, where essentially wider issues, especially in and around housing, were identified and are still currently actively being worked on. So I think, yes, we've got our own performance measures. We look to achieve 90% of the plan or 95% of the plan. There's always reasons behind each individual audit as to whether or not they will or won't reach the reporting stages at the appropriate time. Bear in mind, we're working to cut-off dates. So if you want a timely annual conclusion report to form part of your AGS, there does need to be a cut-off date. And with some of those areas, as I say, it's outside of our control. At this point in time, I remain confident, as I duty bound to do, legally bound, I'm not sure, under their whatever standards, my professional standards and all of the rest of it as well. I remain confident that the plan will be substantially delivered in order for me to form an annual conclusion report. Can I say, sat here and now, that 100% of the plan will be reported? No, will be delivered? No, I can't, because there's a lot of it that's outside of our control. I can only control the areas that I'm able to control, and based upon that work, I'm still confident that the plan will be agreed. The plan will be substantially delivered. As I say, at least I think 43 or 46% of reviews now are at least at reporting stages now. So there's always going to be a lag between the work being undertaken and those reports done. I think that the significant majority of all audit reviews now have been scoped, terms of references have been agreed. So the only audits that haven't really progressed, which we're still actively progressing in the background, are those audits that will start between January and March. So basically our Q4 reviews. Again, will it all be delivered by the 31st of March? No, it won't be, because we never say it will be. It'll be delivered in sufficient time to then form the annual conclusion report that generally either comes through in around May or July time, depends upon timing.
Before Neil answers, I'll just mention that should be noted the internal audit report is dated for the 31st of October 25, so it may give an erroneous impression because it is 4 weeks out of date, and great work has been done since then. Councillor Cutler.
Yeah, I mean, to add to Anthony's comments, I mean, it is a rolling programme, but because it has a cut-off date for an annual report, there are always reports that are absolutely finalised in the next year, and they don't come into this reporting. So having sat on this committee, either on the committee or visiting the committee for the last 12 years, I think this is a very similar position to most years, actually, and it always seems that, you know, you're halfway through the year and we're not halfway through the final reports, but they always get there.
Councillor Pincher.
So one of the constraining factors seems to be that time is spent on trying to reconcile differences of approach between, you know, standards which you adopt and standards which officers adopt. Is the only real acceptable outcome for you that you know, the officers were to adopt wholesale your views, or is there a little bit of room for manoeuvre there? Do you ever agree something slightly different or rather different with officers? And could that be done in a way that saves time?
I think you may be muddling that question with the valuation from the external auditors. It's not for us to say what your policy should need to be. There's either a legislative, I can never say it, requirement of things you need to do, which we will then assess you against. Very cut and dry. If it's assessing you against your own internal policies, then again, have you complied with them or not? That's we're not there to sit in judgment. We're not there to catch you out. We're not the police. We're not there to form an opinion on what your individual policy should be. That's for other committees and for the elected members to decide. So there tends not to be differences of opinion between ourselves. There might be differences of opinion on our findings and the gravity of the findings, and always with all of our audit reports, we identify the issues that send down to the officers and the council to come up with the actions, or to not come up with actions that it proposes to take to address the issues identified. Under the new global internal audit standards, which came into effect from the 1st of April 2025 in the public sector, there are some additional requirements that have been placed on us. One of those requirements that we did adopt early and was included within my annual opinion for last year, and will certainly be included in any individual audit review and also within future progress reports, is whether or not I feel, in my opinion, and it's always a judgment, whether or not the council's taken undue risks and accepting risks that are outside of the council's risk appetite. Again, the council sets its own risk appetite. It's not for us to tell you what is an acceptable level of risk. All we would do is say, have you followed the due processes in line with your own policies and procedures?
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's also important to stress that the management actions that we've got have on the table and on page 74, you know, the list of the actions are agreed with the auditors, aren't they? It's a conversation. The audit report has identified areas that the auditors believe are a weakness. They then enter into a discussion as to what the management actions are to resolve those risks that the auditors have picked up. So it's very much a two-way process in this case, which I don't think was the case years ago. I think it used to be, you must do this, and
going back to very, very old days, that was always the case. I've been in internal audit now for 16, 17 years, and the approach we have always taken is we don't tell you what you should do because you won't do it. And you say, why are you doing that? Oh, the auditors told us to. Why are you not doing that? Oh, the auditors. No. That's not the way it works. We identify the issues, the council come up to the appropriate action. We feel that action isn't appropriate or doesn't address the issues, then obviously we'll enter into a period of dialogue. Again, every audit report and the actions are all signed off by a member of the senior management team to make sure they're happy with it as well. So if there are risks, if there are areas that aren't being addressed, then your own internal processes again should be picking up on those, and you should get the challenge accordingly. I can't say specifically for Winchester, but I can say in very general terms, there are always audit reports where service managers either want to go far further than is perhaps realistic within the resources available, or don't want to go as far as their directors want them to do, and there is always some sort of challenge in and around those areas before reports are finalised. Before anything's finalised, then it's all signed off by the senior management team, so they have their own endorsement over the actions that their staff are going to take and need to hold them account accordingly that those actions have been taken.
Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Chairman. In the report, section 11 on page 10 of the report, analysis of live audit reviews. I'm always worried after years of making any comments about the corporate risk register. We're always pretty colours there. But there's a pretty colour here, which is blue, which is substantial for the new homes programme audit, which seems very positive. But next to it is a big red blob, which says we've got a high overdue action. And I wonder if that's, how is that compatible? And secondly, is that high overdue action, has it been actioned?
You'd like to refer to the next page, so pages 75, that gives the detail of what the original observation was, the action that that the council are going to take about it, and it also provides their own service update as to when that action will be addressed. So I believe in this particular instance, the action was to discuss, update and agree a housing development strategy, which from looking at your own committee papers, I believe went to Cabinet on the 19th.
So again, it's the slight delay in producing those papers. If it was current, that wouldn't be there because we adopted the new housing strategy on the 19th.
Thank you. But my own satisfaction, the colours, the fact there's a substantial assessment made, of opinion made of the audit, but there's a high overdue action at the time of that assessment.
Yeah.
Is that acceptable in normal cases?
Again, it's not for me to sit in judgment, it's just a report on the position. So all low priority actions are coloured green, medium coloured orange, red are coloured, high coloured red. It's a high priority, which was deemed by the council to be a high priority action, therefore it's red, it's overdue. It's now been addressed. We report updates on any overdue high priority actions. We also provide updates on the medium low priority actions, but rather than having all of the context, I think again Councillor Cutler will confirm that in the days when you used to have a large number of overdue actions, it would make the report exceptionally long. So really we're just focusing on those areas where you think that you would provide an update more accordingly. So we report in detail on the highs, very low numbers, which is why there are a lot of other context in and around it. With the medium and low priority actions, we just identify what the agreed revised implementation dates are for those actions. Should you want further information, I'm sure officers would be happy to provide it.
But it doesn't change your opinion of the level of assurance we can draw from the from that.
Sorry,
you identified it with a substantial level of assurance.
Yeah,
that isn't affected by the number of outstanding actions.
No, it's based upon the scope of the review that was discussed and agreed at the time, and the work that was done in accordance with the agreed scope of that audit.
Councillor Billy Morgan.
Thank you. I'm conscious I'm still a relatively new member to the committee, but there was something I read under the fly tipping update, which kind of raised my eyebrows slightly. Said that internal audit was unable to establish access permissions for investigation files stored on the S drive and therefore could not confirm that access to sensitive records was appropriately restricted. I wonder if you could just maybe talk a little bit more about that, and are there any concerns with this being a more widespread issue? Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, sorry. Hey,
70, sorry, it went, I was looking at just 73, so it starts at 72 and then goes on to 73. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we weren't able to establish whether or not access to those records had been appropriately restricted. That information wasn't made available to us, so I can't say hand on heart that access is appropriately restricted or not, because that information wasn't forthcoming. So I honestly don't know whether or not unauthorised officers could access those records, because we weren't able to establish it during the audit. Whether that's pervasive across the rest of the organisation, unless I've specifically looked at it, I wouldn't be able to comment. Now, what I can say is when it is relevant for certain audit reviews, so if I use the example of so you're looking at council tax, so one of your Revs and Bens type reviews, then one of those areas will always be if you've got a standalone system where that information is kept, or where all of that processing activity is, it's easier to establish in those sort of areas that access is restricted to the appropriate people, that access is at the right levels. But when it's your own internal systems and your own internal documentation, that's a bit more difficult to sometimes establish if that information isn't readily available. So essentially what you're saying is, has a secure area been set up on your own internal systems, and is that restricted appropriately? We weren't able to establish that.
So I guess, forgive my ignorance, but then who is responsible for kind of following up on that? I appreciate it probably doesn't sit with yourselves, but
So again, it will be as part of those actions. I believe it's in the final paragraph. That they are obviously looking to make sure that all of those issues have been addressed. So one of those bits would be, you know, to make sure that those records are accessible to those people who need to have a legitimate reason to see them, and are restricted accordingly otherwise. So yeah, absolutely, the council's responsible for making sure that happens.
Thank you. Any further questions? Now move to any debate on this. And then I shall recommend the Audit and Governance Committee note the internal audit progress report 25-26. Agreed and noted. Good. Okay, then it's Anthony Harvey again to introduce the external quality assessment AG 176. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. So there's always been a requirement under the old standards, public sector internal audit standards, that we've been working to for the last sort of 10 years or so, that once every 5 years we have an external quality assessment that's performed by an independent external auditor to assess our compliance against the relevant standards at the time. So we've had two external quality assessments, the results of which have been reported back to the committee back in 2015 and 2020, or the closest committee to those times. We're required to have an external assessment, a minimum of once every 5 years. And so obviously we're now going to be assessed against the new global internal audit standards that took effect from the 1st of April of this year. The report outlines the process that we've gone to in selecting what we feel is the most appropriate route for the external quality assessment, which is a self-assessment with independent validation. And the reasons for that are outlined on paragraphs 11.27 to 11.28 of the report, which is on agenda page 86. Essentially, there's two approaches. There's two approaches plus a sort of slightly separate one that isn't quite as independent. So one is for a full scope external quality assessment, where the external assessment team do the majority of the work based upon the evidence that we give them. The second route that is a lot more cost effective is we undertake our self-assessment that we're required to do regardless every year. Gather all of the information, give them the self-assessment, all of the information and all of the evidence that we have gathered, which backs up our own assessments, and then they will then go through our self-assessment against the evidence that we've given them and said, is that reasonable or not? So it's a more cost-effective option. There is an option for a tripartite sort of reciprocal peer review, but given the complexities of the partnership with over 35 individual partners and also the questions of independence, we didn't feel, one, that was going to be appropriate, two, that it would give you that independence assurance where a full external body would be able to provide for you, and also in the current context that would be an incredible draw on our time if we were going to do this assessment for other bodies. So we feel it's the most appropriate route. Obviously the timeliness of this report is a bit of an issue. I wasn't aware that the September meeting was going to get cancelled until the night of the July meeting. If not, I would have brought the report to that July meeting if I'd have been aware. So you would have had this information in advance of the assessment taking place rather than at the tail end of it nearly being completed. The full outcome, not only of our self-assessment that we're required to do each year, but also the outcome of the external quality assessment will be reported through to the first available committee in the new year. Whether we've had the report in sufficient time for that to go through to the 29th of January meeting that's been put in place, or because again it's outside of our control a little bit, or whether or not that comes to the March meeting, I can't say yet because it depends when we get the report from the assessor. But hopefully we'll be receiving it in a week or two and we can be reporting the outcomes accordingly back in January.
Thank you. That's much appreciated because there is the factor with this report that it is a snapshot of quite a long time ago. So can I just have clarity? You did engage an external quality assessment. You got a quote for that, and that process is almost complete, effectively. So this is very much a historical document we're looking at, and there is changes.
Yes, that I'm required under all of the standards to report through to yourselves, but obviously I've no control over the timing of the committees. So.
Thank you, Councillor Both.
Obviously it's a historic document, so it's just more for my curiosity. But in the previous paper, it was mention of a certain amount of attrition in the internal audit team, which had slowed things up somewhat in terms of delivery and several kind of reports slipping. And obviously, one of the considerations with the decision to go self-assessment or to use an external provider for this quality assurance process would be balancing internal resources versus the cost of things. Obviously, you've taken a choice to take the hit on internal resources, whereas previously you've had resources crunches. Was that retrospectively, were they a series of events that didn't work out the way that would have been ideal in terms of delivery of internal audit?
As a member of the senior management team of the partnership and fairly cognizant of the length and hours that I work and the length of hours that my boss works, we absorb a lot of extra work. So the day-to-day delivery of the audit plans hasn't been affected because other than perhaps the odd meeting where the external assessor may want to meet with our internal audit staff, everything else has been absorbed by the senior management team at our own health costs. I used to have hair many moons ago, but yeah, it's a little bit grayer.
So can I ask, on the previous quality assessments, what approach was taken on those occasions?
The approach that was taken back in 2020 was similar to the self-assessment with independent validation because there was an enormous amount of evidence that we did need to pull together, but the team, it was more of them sort of compiling a lot of documentation themselves as well. Back in 2015, I think it would have probably been more of a full scope EQA type approach. Obviously, the complexities that we have is as a partnership, we have grown in size and in partners for quite a few years now. So we now have in excess of 35 partners. So even if the approach that was taken back in 2015 or 2020 was appropriate, essentially, you know, we have to have, for example, an individual charter for every organisation. So that's now 35 individual charters that we have to demonstrate compliance with. We got 35 individual plans for each of our partners, and it's, if you're getting quarterly reports through, then that's going to be 4 times 35. So it's just the volume of documentation and the volumes of things that we now have to prove increases exponentially. Also, as well, with the new global internal audit standards that come in from 1st of April, there is far more prescription on a lot of these areas now. So there's a lot of hoops that we've had to jump through for this year. Also, as well, the guidance. There's 3 essential guidance documents that we're working to, where they're new standards, then new releases keep getting made either by CIPFA or the relevant sort of standard setters that are then interpreting the global internal audit standards for the UK public sector. So goalposts do keep moving as well. So even during the assessment, CIPFA and their infinite wisdom have released another new bulletin that's meant an even more amount of work to be done under the assessment. So thanks to them for that.
Any other questions for members? Moving to any debate? Okay. So I recommendation is that the committee notes the arrangements for the external assessment of the Southern Internal Audit Partnership against the global internal audit standards in the UK public sector. Noted, agreed. Great, thank you. And now we have a completely different person. I know it's Anthony again, to introduce the Internal Audit Strategy 25 to 28.
Yeah, thank you. I must apologise for the level of documentation that's come through to you this year. Obviously, with the new standards coming in, there's a lot of things that we've had to do. So it's all happened in this year. So with regards to the Internal Audit Strategy, it's now a requirement under the new standards. Previously, it wasn't a requirement under the old standards, but we've always had one anyway, because obviously it's really keen that we do have continuous improvement, and we do look to sort of improve on our audit offering. So this provides the strategy for the next 3 years, so 2025 to 2028. As previously mentioned, with in excess of 30 partners, we can't have 30 individual strategies for each of those organisations that could potentially compete and drag us in numerous different directions and have different performance measures and different outcomes that potentially conflict. So the document really outlines that the process that we have gone through in order to inform what are going to be the 3 strategic objectives that we look to take forward over the next 3 years. So essentially we undertook a SWOT analysis coming up for 2 years ago now. Then based upon that SWOT analysis, we then had a consultation with all audit committee members or equivalent across all of our partner organisations, as well as their senior management team, to really identify those areas that were their top priorities to be taken forward. Once that assessment was undertaken, we then again went back out on the outcomes of those to make sure that all the partners were signed up and agreed to them. The top 3 areas that were identified are now going to be our strategic aims to be taken forward over the next 3 years, based upon the consensus that was agreed with each of those partners over those 3 areas. We did consult on, I can't can't remember if it was 7 or 11 areas now. It doesn't necessarily mean that those areas won't be taken forward, but we won't be formally assessed against them. So we'll be assessed against the 3 objectives, and our performance measures have been updated accordingly, which is in and around the agile auditing, the data analytics by default, and I forget what the other one is, top off my head now, sorry. So anyway, there's the 3 measures that we've agreed to be taken forward. The full strategy is provided with you, along with the associated performance measures that go with the strategy.
Thank you. Questions, members? Councillor Godfrey.
Appendix B, the results of the survey on priorities. Slightly disappointing response rate of 20-odd%. But how closely do the result of that survey map the hopes and expectations of the partnership? Is that what you would hope would be the priorities for the future?
I think I think timeliness of reporting has been something that's very when we do an annual survey each year as well. One of the criticisms of audit is, well, you know, it takes too long from start to finish. The reports are out of date before they've even been done, and all the rest of it. Again, these things aren't within our control. But now the performance measures will say what if those reports have been issued within the agreed timescales, and if not, why not? And obviously, this is the first year of having those figures. It will very much set a benchmark. We've also got the additional measures as well. Is okay, did the draft report go out in time? Did the final report go out in time? Because again, those elements aren't within our control, so it may show some quite interesting and illuminating areas where we can then focus our attention. With regards to further enhancing the optimised use of data analytics, I think that's a real sort of area that we've been looking to drive through and move towards for several years. Because, for example, if you're looking at a system where there's been 10,000 transactions gone through, to a look at a small sample, which has always been, you know, the audit process and statistically significant and all of these things, if you've looked at these areas previously, I think being able to look at whole population, being able to look at thousands, tens of thousands of transactions and being able to form conclusions on those is far more meaningful and far more insightful than traditional audit methods that could only ever really look at samples. And obviously the third standard, now I've got it in front of me, obviously conforms to the global standards. Of course, that's really what we're going to want to do. You're going to want a fully compliant audit service. But as I say, the other areas that were identified doesn't mean we're not going to ignore them. We think they're all valid measures, and we will look to drive those forward as far as possible, but not necessarily be formally assessed against them.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of my favourite subjects at the moment, use of AI. Interested to know how it's being used and how are we ensuring it's being used responsibly? And are there any kind of standards about how it's being used within audits at the moment, or are we just kind of sucking and seeing how it works?
Absolutely not, no. So with regards to our use of AI, obviously I can't comment on the council's use of AI at this particular point in time, but with regards to our use of AI, it is use it with caution and use it with a lot of safeguards. So at the moment, obviously we're hosted by Hampshire County Council. All of our systems are Hampshire County Council systems, and there are restrictions on the use of AI that have placed on all staff through Hampshire County Council. There is only one AI system that we can access, and there are the guarantees and safeguards that any information that is put through that AI system, which is Copilot, with the county council, none of that information categorically goes outside of the organisation. So if we did make use of it, you won't suddenly find your results if you performed a similar search using a publicly available artificial intelligence thing. I think at the moment it's incredibly useful for summarising, digesting enormous complex documents that, you know, gives you a really good sort of précis of, you know, several hundred-page piece of legislation to give you a nice bite-sized summary of it. We're not using it to analyse data sets. We've got our own internal software systems that we specifically use for data analytics, because that's a whole different ball game, and it's one that we don't take lightly. So I think at the moment that the use of AI, there are those safeguards and there are those restrictions that are placed upon us by the county council by its use of those systems, and I can't access them even if I wanted to. So the only way I could make use of an external system would be if I intentionally and willfully, against all the county council's policies, was big to extract that information, email it to myself, and then willfully use an external thing, which I don't think I'm prepared to do, and I would certainly hope none of my staff are as well. With regards to the council's use of AI, then obviously, if, as and when we come to audit that, if we do come and audit that, it would be again to assess them against their own internal policies and procedures.
Thank you. I mean, I found that answer particularly interesting because I'm more of an AI skeptic, and particularly, and certainly when I was filling in this form, as soon as I said the word artificial intelligence, I went no, because with an audit, assurance is the whole point of the exercise, and anything which throws any doubt into it, even if the whole process has been rigorous, if the perception is that it's not been analysed, it's still devalued, even if you've done the work. Councillor Brophy.
It's a question that ChatGPT has just suggested to me. Actually, just joking aside, I noticed the point about agile auditing and creating kind of, I suppose, a more dynamic way of passing on feedback back to the organisation that can be actioned, you know, more in real time rather than with a lag. Is that something that's already happening at the moment, or is that from this year onwards kind of moving in? And I suppose a question possibly for Councillor Cutler is whether or not the council is effectively taking that information, then do we have internally feedback loops to allow people to use that, any kind of feedback meaningfully from the audit process?
So certainly based upon probably over 10 years of annual stakeholder feedbacks, one of the comments is the timeliness of audit reports. So we've always looked to deliver those in as quick a time frame as we possibly can do. As I say, there's certain areas that are always outside of our control. If it's reliant upon the information from the organisation that's not forthcoming, probably in the past we've been too guilty at, you know, going back and requesting it, re-requesting it and re-requesting it until it comes through. Now it's just a case of, right, well, sorry, we've asked for it 3 times, we draw a line under it. You can only conclude that either doesn't exist or it's just not made available to us. So I think that probably refers back to the earlier question and around the sort of system accesses. I think for any audit to be meaningful, really prompt and effective and timely feedback is always critical, because, you know, even if sort of 6 months passes, then it sort of becomes a little bit out of date and becomes a little bit irrelevant. But obviously, again, what then happens to those reports once they've been issued, especially the draft report stage, again, it then becomes a little bit outside of our control. So I think these performance measures be really helpful to try and start to identify what some of those pinch points are. If we look, sorry to jump around, but if we look back to the previous progress report, the progress report and the performance measures there about the number of reviews that have obviously been reported on time and all of the rest of it, where there were sort of half a dozen pieces of work that didn't make the annual conclusion last year for the reasons that were reported. We're still reporting on them, but clearly we haven't met the timescales because they weren't delivered when we thought we'd be delivered. Are we trying to sweep it under the carpet? No, but obviously it will affect our performance for this year. But it give us some real meaningful measures to be able to really look to sort of drive these things forward. I think Councillor Cutler's probably be able to answer the internal element a bit better.
I'm not sure I can, but I do think you know, quite an important point's been raised there about that, and it's clear that to me from your answers and from what you've just said about that timescale, that, you know, the fly tipping report was absence of information simply because you need to keep the scale going, and if it wasn't reported quickly enough, and I think that's maybe something internally that we need to perhaps flag up, that actually, you know, it doesn't look good to get a limited assurance, and if you'd provided the information, you probably wouldn't have had limited assurance. You know, that's the element of things in it, and perhaps that's something that we need to look at.
Any other questions? Any debate? Any debate? I just going to express my delight that the strategic objectives are being agile and giving more feedback to the organisation, and the improvement of the standards, and optimising data analytics, because these are all the things that audit does. They are basically what it's for. And the other things on the list were things that would be nice, but I'm certainly understand why the survey people respond going, we want you to keep focus on the things that you exist for. And so I'm very glad those are your top 3 strategic objectives. Thank you, and thanks, Anthony. I think that's you done. If we want to item agent. If you want a recommendation, the audit and governance are requested to review and note the internal audit strategy 25 to 28. Is that noted and agreed? Great, thank you. Then moving on to item 13, Q1, Q2 governance monitoring 25-26. Simon Howson to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report brings to you, as it often does at each meeting, an update, quarterly update on key governance issues. As we've previously heard this evening in Anthony's report, this report previously has included an update on internal audit progress, and following the introduction of the global internal audit standards, that's now a standalone report and no longer part of this report. So this report is somewhat shorter than you've seen in the past and includes a bit less detail, as it now excludes the update on the internal audit progress, as it is separately reported. It still does, however, include the update on the actions around the issues that were included in the annual governance statement, and I'm pleased to report really good progress is being made with the actions responding to the housing regulator, as well as obviously the progression of the actions relating to local government reorganisation. The report also provides an update on risk management and our corporate risk register, and an update on the most recent review of our corporate risks with Executive Leadership Board held last month. Finally, the report also includes an update on code of conduct complaints as included in the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions, members? No, it's very quiet. That's an excellent report. There's nothing unanswered. Any debate? Apart from expressing our appreciation and admiration as a report. Okay, that's I like it when it's quick, so that's good. So we go straight to the recommendations. That the Audit and Governance Committee note the contents of the report, including the progress made against the actions in the annual governance statement. The committee is requested to raise any issues or concerns on the content of the report to the cabinet member. We didn't do that, so agreed and noted. Agreed. Okay, thank you. Then there's no more business for this meeting, so I shall ask it comes to an end and to switch off the YouTube channel. Thank you.